Jonathan Conricus is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a former spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces. No newcomer to the media line. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you, Felice. Indeed, I remember sitting down in your excellent studio. I think it was 7 or 8 years ago for the first time, and we've been in touch since.
Jonathan, so much has happened since we initially spoke, and I think it goes back to even previously before then. I'm quite sure. There's quite a lot of interviews we have with you over the years. But my point being is here we are again. We've been discussing this whole issue of what's happening with Iran. Israel finally has done it. They had the courage. They went in, they attacked, and everyone is asking what is going on right now on the ground. What does Israel have to do to finish the job?
Yeah, so I think we're far from finishing the job, and I want to calibrate expectations with, people watching, whether they're in Israel, perhaps in Iran, if they're allowed to see it on the internet, and across the world. I think this is going to take time. This is no small endeavor. This is not a quick in and out job. We're talking about a vast country in terms of size with tremendous resources. And specifically, the Iranians' nuclear weapons program is a large, dispersed, heavily guarded and fortified program that is going to take time to dismantle. What Israel has done is to establish the basic conditions that it needs in order to be able to do so. Israel now dominates Iranian skies. Israel has been able to take out all of their air defenses, and it enjoys the ability to strike using the Air Force all of those locations that Israel knows that the Iranians were busy building nuclear bombs. So how long will that take? I think we're looking at, at least weeks. And a lot of people, in my mind, are very, have too short of a attention span, and they think that this will be over quickly. No, it's not going to be over quickly. And a country like Israel doesn't go on an effort like this, launch strikes against Iran, only to wrap things up after 5 days. That doesn't make sense. This is a once in a lifetime historic event. And it's once in a lifetime for Israel. I hope we'll never have to do it again. But this is a once in a nation's lifetime in our 77 plus years of existence, where we fly so far and conduct military operations over a country that is far larger than us, has greater resources, and most importantly, was up until a few days ago on the path to develop weapons of mass destruction against us. That's the context.
Jonathan, it's a lot to take in. People are watching all over the world, every move. Hundreds of ballistic missiles have been flown over Israel. The last 48 hours, we've seen less ballistic missiles than the first few days. What do you think is happening?
So it's one of two things. Either the cunning Iranians are trying to trick us into complacency, and they're firing less missiles in order for us to lower our guard, and then maybe they will do something big and disastrous. And the Iranians are cunning and clever, and I think that's definitely an option. The other possibility is that what Israel is doing offensively and defensively is working. Offensively, Israel is hunting the missile launchers, and basically attacking that bottleneck. The crucial bottleneck is launchers. They have thousands of missiles, but they have a very limited amount of launchers. And if Israel attacks the launchers and takes them out of the equation, then the missiles are pretty useless. And that's what Israel is doing. Reportedly, Israel has said, the IDF has said, more than a third of the missile launchers have been taken out. And Israel continues with these launcher hunting operations, and they're successful. Again, Israel is able to do that because it has aerial superiority, and the Israeli Air Force can patrol and strike in Iranian skies. What Israel is also doing is using its air defenses, the Arrow and the David Sling, but mostly the Arrow, with assistance of US THAAD and missiles fired from Aegis vessels in the Mediterranean and elsewhere, All of that together is working to create a pretty good, not excellent and not hermetic and not 100%, but a pretty good defensive bubble above Israel, protecting Israeli civilians. Now, granted, yes, 27 Israelis have been murdered by these incoming missiles. More than 600 have been wounded. There is significant structural damage and devastation in all of those different impact sites. And we're talking about more than 400 missiles that have been fired from Iran at Israel and hundreds of drones, UAVs that have been dispatched. The UAVs, by the way, hugely unsuccessful. Not even a single one of them has impacted in Israel and caused any substantial damage. Sadly, the missiles have. A few have gotten through, but for the last 2.5 days, almost 3 days, no casualties and no significant damage in Israel as a result of missiles because they're firing less missiles and our defenses are able to keep up with it.
Please address how the defense mechanisms are working against drones in particular, that nothing has hit. And second of all, those that are hitting, and we have seen damage. What is going on at that moment? Some are talking about the override that the Iranians are doing to the defense systems that Israel has.
In the first salvos of the first, and second, and third day of the war, what the Iranians were able to do was to saturate a certain area, one small area, and then to fire lots of missiles into that specific area. And then the defenses struggled to keep up in a small area with such a vast amount of incoming missiles. It's called saturation. It's a known tactic, and it's been done before, and I'm sure it will be done in the future. And that is how the Iranians were able to allow a few missiles to hit their or to hit targets in Israel. And again, I'll emphasize they've hit a few military installations, but all of the casualties in Israel have been civilians. We're not talking about dead generals and dead soldiers. We're talking about dead Israeli civilians, women and children that have been killed, and men that have been killed by these incoming missiles. The air defenses against drones, that's very interesting because up until now, we've seen pretty effective drones. We've seen drones used by the Houthis and by Russians in Ukraine and by Ukraine against the Russians. And we've seen the Iranians use it as well pretty successfully. So I'm positively surprised. The components of the air defense are, of course, radars that constantly scan the air, and that's the most important component, which allows you to see what's incoming. And then various types of interceptors, which in this case could be attack helicopters, fighter jets, Iron Dome, and even David Sling. These are the different components that Israel and its allies have at their disposal to intercept drones. And again, judging by results, hugely successful.
All eyes are on Fordo. The big question of the day is at the moment that Israel does need the bunker buster bombs. Israel needs B-2 bombers to bring those bunker buster bombs in order to take out Fordo and the nuclear enrichment program and everything that everybody's had their eyes on. As I said, is the United States going to get involved, come in, and help make this happen?
Yes, you're right. Everybody's talking about it, and even, people who I think have very limited understanding of military affairs, air ordnance, or nuclear affairs are talking about it, and some of them are doing it with a lot of they're making themselves look as if they are experts. But we'll leave that aside. Yes, it's an extremely important site. And bottom line up front, I don't think that this war will end with that installation intact. Now, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Yes, the most elegant and lowest risk option would be an American B-2 dropping 40,000 pounds of a bomb on the location. That would be very nice. But that's an American decision, and there are consequences and considerations. And the US is, I think, very rightfully deliberating if it wants to and if it serves its purposes. So I'll leave that aside for Americans to speak about. And I will just say this without going into specific details of how it can happen. But I think that it would be prudent and wise of everybody who's talking about Fordo and Israeli operations to have a good dose of humility and to recognize that Israel has shown quite a lot of military creativity and ingenuity in this operation already. And I think people should rest assured that Israel has a contingency for the US not deciding to strike in Fordo. Now, there's advantages for the US to strike in Fordo. That's the coup de grace. That'll be the last nail in the coffin, and it can provide a lot of political windfall for the US and for the president. But even if the US decides not to, then I think Israel, again, whatever needs to be done will be done so that that facility isn't standing or isn't intact at the end of this operation. And yes, Israel, I think, can do it.
President Trump has just stated, nobody knows what I'm going to do. That's a very important statement because right now he is a master of words, a master of the game, and everyone is waiting to see, is he going to join Israel and assist in this operation? Having said that, at the same time, the Ayatollah Khamenei is coming out with threats against the United States and threats against Israel. The diplomatic world is playing out. Diplomacy is key right now. That could change the game. Israel has never had the opportunity often to go more than a few days. You're talking several weeks. Does that change the game?
Yeah, I don't envy the Iranians trying to anticipate what President Trump will do, and I think they're struggling. When I look at the tweets of whoever is tweeting on the so-called Supreme Leader's account in English on X, 6 tweets in 1 hour. That's ridiculous. You're a leader of a country at war and you're tweeting. That's what you're doing for an whole hour. For me, it looks very odd, and it signals a lot of things that are not very positive from the Iranian perspective. Yes, diplomacy, super important, and at the end of the day, you do what you do, militarily speaking, but reality is defined by agreements and by deals and by diplomacy. And of course, currently, being on the Israeli side of the table and the US side of the table is a great place to be, thanks to Israeli military achievements. And the bargaining cards are very strong in Israel's hand. Israel is now holding a very strong hand thanks to the American achievements. But there is statecraft, and Israel has to be wise, composed, focused, and play that diplomatic game very well in order to translate military achievements into long-standing diplomatic achievements and things that will really change the Middle East and change our security situation for the future. I think that those efforts are ongoing. I think that Israel is aware of that. And it looks as if so far the US, most of the West, is on the same page with Israel, where countries and organizations are saying very clearly this situation is because Iran was developing nuclear weapons. Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. And as such, we support Israel. And, it's important to listen to the fine or read the fine words of the G7 announcement, what they said and what they didn't say. They said all of what I said, and then they said we want the urge restraint. They didn't say Israel must stop acting against the Iranians, which is very important. And I think that's not an omission. That is the unspoken essence that was of that message. And I think that what the German chancellor said yesterday in an interview in a German language newspaper, that Israel is doing the dirty work of the world and that he's thankful for it. That's excellent. And that's exactly what I think is the right thing of Europeans to be saying, and that they should also support Israel unequivocally. So at this stage, things are proceeding well. But as you say, many things can happen between the end of military action and how that is turned into reality on the ground. And here, traditionally speaking, the Iranians are very good. They're great negotiators. They are great diplomats. They are silver-tongued, and they are liars, the best liars in the world. And that is, of course, something that should put room for caution for Israelis and Americans.
Israel has taken out the Ministry of Defense. They've taken out some of the security apparatus of the Iranians. They've taken out the state television. If you were looking at the big picture right now, what are the key infrastructure, places and buildings that Israel still has to target.
Israel hasn't even started, touching the real important infrastructure, which is oil and gas. That is still, all the targets are ready. They're ready in the data banks of the F-35s and the Israeli Air Force. It's all there, but it's a matter of decision whether or not to strike it. And Israeli Air Force can do that very easily. It's big sitting targets and there's no air defenses. So it's a question of decision only. And here I think, following up on the last question, diplomacy and being part of a bigger international coalition will be important. We have seen, by the way, the Iranians fire towards and hit national infrastructure in Israel. They hit the Haifa oil refinery. It caused the death of 3 Israelis working there and also substantial damage to the oil refinery. And that's something that I think we have to put on the table and acknowledge. But really, if Israel wants to really put the squeeze on the Iranian regime, then there are, I'd say, between 15 and 25 major economic infrastructure that Israel could strike relatively easily that would have a really crucial effect on the regime's ability to sustain itself, to keep the economy going, to import and export, to provide electricity to houses, and all of that could be destroyed by Israel if it decides to.
Let's go back into Israeli territory. There are many foreign journalists that are in Israel. They're reporting this story to the world. Some are telling too much, some might not be telling enough. The biggest problem that we've witnessed is that some of the sites where the attacks are happening are being shown. Is there a danger to Israel when this happens? And what is Israel doing to push back?
I think we've seen that. We've seen Al Jazeera reporters film live from the Mount Carmel area just above Haifa and streaming live whenever the missiles were impacting and providing the Iranians with real live battle damage assessment and confirmation of their hits. That is an extremely reckless and nefarious thing to be doing. Now, when Al Jazeera does it, frankly, I'm not surprised because they're a terror supporting network that masquerades as mass media. They're a tool of a dictatorship and they have no journalistic standards. They have journalistic cards, but they have no journalistic standards. They are the mouthpieces of terror organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. So nothing that Al Jazeera will do will surprise me in any way. I am surprised to see Western media outlets do similar things, probably not with nefarious intentions, basically wanting to be there first and show reality on the ground. But these are things that are not done. You do not do that in a combat zone. And Western journalists should know better. They should be more professional. And against all journalists, there should be clear guidelines given by Israeli authorities what they can and cannot do. And these guidelines have been given, and journalists should respect them. And I think the fact that some have not, some have chosen not to do so, is not good, and it should not be permitted. And there should be sanctions against those network and people and journalists who do it. If they admit that it was a mistake and, first time, no harm, that they didn't intend and, misunderstanding or whatever, but they admit mistake, then I think we should move on. But if they don't, then I think sanctions should be taken and it shouldn't be tolerated.
The Iranian people are moving out. Reza Pahlavi, the crown prince, gets on Twitter and he tells people to go to the streets. The two don't come together. If you're telling them to leave, how are they going on the streets? How does that play out?
I'm not entirely sure that Reza Pahlavi is the right man or right face to be leading this. And I'm not entirely sure that the Iranians will follow. I don't, I'm not an Iran expert, and I would look at, Iran experts like Mark Dubovitz, a fantastic podcast called Iran Breakdown. Lots of Iranians there, including the Crown Prince himself, which was a very interesting episode. What I would say is that I think that, there will be a period of instability and it'll get messy. I don't think that the outcome of whatever happens should be reinstating the monarchy in Iran, because that regime was a failed and corrupt regime that didn't do well by the Iranian people. And I think a lot of Iranians, my age and older, remember that, and they don't want that to be the future and that to be the result. I hope that the Iranians will have the bravery and leadership to reclaim their freedom and then to forge a way forward for their country that suits them. If they want a Muslim interpretation of democracy, tremendous. If they want women's rights, if they want rights for minorities, excellent for them. Usually that brings good things to society when you do that. If they want complete Western liberal democracy, maybe that's a good thing. I'm not entirely sure. But whatever happens, it has to be in the hands of the Iranian people. It has to be an Iranian decision. It shouldn't be something that is inserted from abroad, and it has to be a legitimate, homegrown solution. And I'm sorry to say, if there's a revolution, it'll be messy. I haven't read in history of any revolution that was benign and happened over a cup of tea in air-conditioned surroundings. Revolutions are messy. And when tyrannical regimes are dismantled, they usually don't go peacefully. There's maybe one example of the Soviet Republic that went relatively peacefully, but other than that, there's usually fighting and casualties. So I hope I hope this will happen. I hope this evil regime will be relegated to the dustbin of history. I hope the people who led it will be held accountable by the Iranian people. And I hope that Iran, which is a country of tremendous history, ancestry, and real significant contribution and standing in the world, I hope that they'll be able to chart their way forward, which is good for them and doesn't threaten us.
Jonathan Conricus, I wish you a quiet night, a couple of less barrages of missiles. Thank you so much for joining us at the Media Line.
Thank you very much.